and I'll give a little intro about Bo, just to give a little context. So Bo attended Duke for undergrad and received his Ph.D. from Georgia Tech, both in electrical and computer engineering. At IBM, he was part of the development team for what were then the fastest processors in the world, and which were incorporated into the IBM Watson supercomputer. He spent nearly a decade inside Raytheon and served as a director of RF systems. He holds over 70 US patents, has numerous publications in energy and computation, and has received numerous accolades, including the Raytheon President's Award for delivering a product in only 5 months from conception at 1/10 of the standard cost by leveraging intelligent embedded design. And most recently, Bo has co-founded Epirus, where he has spent the last 4 years as CTO. And Epirus is a defense company, which is bringing Silicon Valley style innovation to defense. They specialize in power optimization and software-defined directed energy systems, and have launched a breakthrough directed energy product, which is a big deal because portable RF weapons, which can disable electronics such as hostile drones without harming life, have been a much sought after capability by the US government. But the consensus was sort of in a report that despite 50 years of research on high power microwaves, the US military is unlikely to produce a usable weapon. And so a working product with these capabilities came as a total surprise. So it's great to have you, Bo.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll get into our first kind of section, kind of exploring as the sort of tech company and then defense sort of government kind of sector there. So a large portion of the South Park Commons community have CS backgrounds and have worked primarily for civilian tech companies. And so we're curious about your journey going from defense prime to defense tech startup, and some of the lessons for developing for government customers. So kind of the first maybe question there is, like, did you consider like a civilian tech, career, or was this a very intentional choice for you?
Yeah, it was a very intentional choice for me to do this. Yeah, like a little bit about Epirus. We consider ourselves a technology company. Defense products just happen to be kind of our first market. So yeah, I mean, obviously with my background at IBM and then my background at Raytheon, which yeah, thanks so much for the nice introduction. Yeah, I mean, so seeing the world from both sides has been a huge benefit for my career, and have loved that. So I kind of learned lessons from both sides, and yeah, like just yeah, part of just if we look back at Silicon Valley's history, right? A lot of the great commercial innovations actually started in the defense world. So if we go back 50, 60, or 70 years, a lot of our, like the computing revolution, right? That was first funded by the government. So then, like a lot of people, I forget, like, Packard from HP, right? He was the assistant secretary of defense for a while. So there's like a long history of that. So actually, one of my favorite stories is some of the CDMA, very early CDMA patents that Qualcomm is now famous for, started out as a military communications type of contract, and then went under a secrecy order at the U.S. Patent Office, and then boom, once the cell phone revolution emerges, it releases its secrecy order and becomes a commercial innovation. So I think actually what Epirus is doing is going back to the roots a little bit of Silicon Valley. So that's one of the things we're really proud of here. Um,
Interesting. Yeah. So thanks for the little correction there. So Epirus, yes. And okay, cool. So yes, you don't consider yourself strictly defense tech. You said kind of more almost. Would you say kind of more focus on government or private sector?
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love to talk about that a little bit. So we did uh, our first set of products, and like some of our most important customers, are definitely defense. So we definitely build defense technology and defense products for sure. And so our first product, which yeah you've seen out kind of in the news, yeah, is a high power microwave system that, yeah, think about it like electromagnetic pulse. Is you see some of these movies like the Matrix or so forth, where they can take out a whole drone swarm with an electromagnetic pulse. So yeah, that's what our first product is. We've brought that to life. We've gone from science fiction to reality. And kind of the cool part of the story of Epirus is necessity was the mother of invention there. So I think one of the key breakthroughs to build an electromagnetic pulse capability like that, build a directed energy capability, was to control the power. Obviously, like we had to get much more efficient power conversion and much more efficient energy, much more efficient thermal characteristics to get a strong enough amount of power to do that mission. And so necessity became the mother of invention. We invented this a technology called smart power, and it turns out smart power is useful for increasing the power efficiency in all sorts of applications. And so, yeah, absolutely, the government and the U.S. military is certainly one of our most important customers. And so we're also making this smart power technology platform. There's applications in commercial communications and in the power and energy parts of the industry as well. Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. I guess. What do you have any particular thoughts on working with the U.S. Federal or even state governments, like kind of that customer as opposed to sort of more the individual or business customers, right? That a lot of people at South Park Commons would be more experienced working with.
Yeah, I think the one of the really interesting things about working with the government is in some ways they're better at telling us what they need than an individual a customer. I think in some ways. So, for example, with the federal government and the Department of Defense, right? They have to put out their congressional budgets and so forth. Generally, get built 2 years ahead of time, and there's the NDAA. National Defense Authorization Acts that kind of give you high level what the budgets and what kind of items the government is interested in as customers. That it'll give you a look 2 years out into the future. And so, and yeah, our job absolutely is to help shape those with great product demonstrations. Like if we come out with a great product demonstration, they said, oh, maybe we should put more money into that program. That was a really successful product demonstration. And so part of the job absolutely is to continue to shape those budgets. But absolutely, you can see what the budget is like 2 years up to a 2+ years ahead of time. There's also I think one of the most meritocratic organizations, like customers on the entire planet, is the Department of Defense and DARPA. Where they'll put out a broad area announcement for a certain product or service or capability that they're looking for, tell you what kind of the high level specs they're looking for, and then just let the best technology win. And so in some ways that's very advantageous, right? And then there's also, I think for startups, obviously there is the things like they'll do the SIBR program and things like that. Now, I will say part of what we're doing that is brand new here in defense tech is finally bringing this idea that a lot of these has been in the commercial world for a while, which is, hey, I'm going to build a product and for what that's kind of ahead of the market at the time. I'm going to build a product that we think the customers want. And I think that's absolutely what we've done to some degree, is like almost get ahead of the curve for especially some of this high power microwave technology, and build a product that when we first started out, no one thought we could build, but then we went and proved it that, yeah, this is a new era. We think this is a new era of directed energy solutions, particularly because of this kind of drone threat that you hear about all over the news these days. So yeah, those are kind of some similarities and differences, I would say, with some of the commercial customers, maybe the South Park Commons communities used to.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean that's I guess from my understanding of selling to military, right? It's that it does seem to be more driven by right these different programs or RFPs or maybe solicitations as opposed to I mean it's sort of interesting because right you developed something that was kind of on the wish list but not on the budget. It seems perhaps like a risky sector to do one of these. Steve Jobs, you didn't you never asked for it, but here it is kind of things, with, right. One more thing. I mean, what was the sort of genesis of kind of founding Epirus? Like, was sort of like technology came first, or kind of how did you fit that together with this sales cycle with the government?
Yeah, sure. The government, the Pentagon, and the Department of Defense, they will kind of advertise absolutely what they're looking for. So like I remember, if you look at their top 10 most important technologies, you look at their top three. When we started Epirus, and this is still the case today to a large degree, they said, "Hey, we think some of the top three technologies are AI, the field of hypersonics, and directed energy." So absolutely, they said, hey, like I think what is great about working with a government is a lot of times it's very much like how us as engineers, I'm an engineer through and through. Very much how we like to be given a problem, right? Like, hey, here's my high level problem. You guys have to figure out how to solve it. And so in many ways, the government did do that here, right? They said, hey, we think direct energy is really important for a couple of reasons here, right? This whole idea of if I can mitigate a problem with direct energy, like an airborne threat, right? There's this great quote that came out, that for the first time in, since World War II in 70 years, the U.S. is without air superiority. And what we mean by that is drones. Yeah, drones are a very nefarious threat. So it's like, hey, the government said, hey, we need solutions to this drone problem. We are absolutely going to put products out to market that solve that problem. We're going to hold competitions, open and fair competitions, that if you bring your product there and you outcompete all your competitors, we will choose your product. And then they also said, hey, here's a large budget. We're putting a large portion of the budget towards directed energy solutions. And so without kind of specifying, going into details, like the public details, are very high level, but they say, hey, there's also this pot of money for a directed energy, without going into specific details of what that is. If you can bring these kind of high level characteristics of a direct energy solution, and it's best in class, we will fund it. So that's the great thing about, and so the government is very meritocratic in those ways. And I think so. So to get back to your question, it was a great question, by the way. How did Epirus get started? Part of it is seeing those trends, right? There's this really nefarious drone trend, which, like, let me talk about what's going on with drones for a second here. Is used to, right, back the last, like, drones are a fairly recent phenomenon, right? I think we can all remember maybe 7, 8, 9, 10 years is really when the era of the drone started, like fairly recently. And used to, what the 90% of what's out on the market, 95% really of what's out on the market to stop drones historically has been jammers. There's someone with a controller that's sending a control signal to the drones. Now, then there's, if I want to stop that drone, I send out a jamming signal. I send out a noisy bunch of power at that same frequency, and it stops the control signal from reaching the drone. The drone can't get a control signal. It doesn't know where to go. So it either just returns home, or it stops. And so with the invention of AI, that and image-aided navigation, like these two technologies together have allowed it so drones don't need a signal at all now. They have a camera and they can image the ground, and they map the ground, and they compare that image to a database they have of Google Maps or something. It says, oh, I know exactly where I am. And then you can pre-program them with AI. Said, hey, here's your mission. I want you to fly there and do this particular task. And so now they don't need any control signal at all. They don't need a control signal from a human. They don't need a GPS signal to figure out where they're going. So now jammers are completely obsolete. And so we saw this trend. And they're also what's called an asymmetric threat, right? It's a completely asymmetric in that you can go out and a bad guy can buy a drone for a $200 at Walmart, turn it into frankly a bomb or a missile by strapping some payload to it, and now you've got this really small object that has a really small radar cross section because it's made out of plastic, that is completely autonomous. You can't jam it. It can also, by the way, be programmed into swarms. So we kind of saw the tea leaves at Epirus when we started. We said, hey, we think drones, this is going to be a huge asymmetric threat. there is a big market for that. We think directed energy, the government has said that's one of their top priorities in that technology. There's a big market for that. And then finally, I'm kind of a device physicist at heart. That's part of my background. And what we saw was the third kind of leg of the triangle that led us to Epirus was the technology piece. What the technology piece is compound semiconductors, specifically a gallium nitride. There's this really interesting paper we published in December of 2020 on what on this trend, very similar to Moore's law. Moore's law, right? We're all familiar with it. It says we're going to double the number of transistors per unit area every roughly 18 months. We found a corollary to that law that says semiconductors are going to double in power every 18 months. So I remember what if we are the really the first ones to spot that trend, and we believe we published it for the first time back in 2020 when we were first starting the company. This says, hey, maybe in 2018, 2017, we could not have built a semiconductor based direct energy weapon system. But if you look at the trend it's an exponential trend. So absolutely by 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, where we are today, absolutely we can build that capability, this EMP type capability. And so we kind of saw all those things converge, this like really hard drone problem, this commitment towards direct energy, right? Because direct energy, I've got infinite shots, I've got infinite ammo. No one has to lug tons and tons of logistics of ammo to come with me. It's safe for humans, right? It's just putting out energy. If like the bad news now is with humans have been putting metal in the air to solve problems for thousands of years, going back to ancient Egypt, right? So now with mortars and physical bullets trying to shoot stuff down, what if you miss? You might hit something behind you, right? And so that's another great part about direction energy, safe for humans. It's going to take out any electronics, going to take out drones. So really what we saw is those three things combining to create a really powerful market force.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it sounds like this is very much product vision driven as opposed to sort of, to spec or, to other requisition. And I guess that seems like that's sort of this theme of you're describing where you don't feel like you've been at all stuck in this sort of like, there's a government spec and we have to design to that. But I guess, do you have any further maybe comments around that? Like, handling product vision, when you're dealing with requisition, kind of more hard definitions around what the product needs to be?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And I think that question pops up a lot. And I think this concept of product vision is one of the things that is kind of a commonality between kind of the commercial world and the government or military world. I think the commonality here is that exactly what you said, is that vision to be able to see what's needed and that understanding that if this thing that is really needed gets built, there's gonna be a market there. And so where Epirus is really special, I think, is I was lucky enough to have that, as you said, that decade at Raytheon, where I got a lot of very, very good, defense experience on what are the concepts of operations, like what are the tactics that are being used by the good guys and bad guys? What are the mission scenarios where there's big gaps, where maybe even America has big gaps in these mission and these concept of operation scenarios and these tactical scenarios. And so I think, and then our leadership team, right, at Epirus has really deep experience there. Lee Madden, our CEO, he was a former Navy SEAL and then went to worked at a tech company at Microsoft in their a federal division. So, we've got, our chief product officer here, Andy, he's an electronic warfare expert, chief engineer. So I think a lot of it was our ability we do have that experience, and we are able to get that same product vision because we did have that experience and background, much like a computer science graduate, just by all their experience. I think I got a dual degree in computer science, by the way, so I very much empathize and love that field. And it's like, yeah, like I got a computer when I was 8 years old. So yeah, like I think a lot of us did, right? We got computers when we were really young. So now you've got 12 years of computing experience by the time you're in college. and so I think that is the key here is that in defense tech, I think you still need that 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years of experience to really be able to generate that product vision and see way out into the future. And I think our leadership team was lucky enough to have that here when we started Epirus.
Hmm. Nice. Yeah. I guess maybe a good follow on for that then is I guess is there sort of a pattern that you see in kind of strategies for identifying really winning like VC fundable defense company ideas or identifying the opportunities? Uh,
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, yeah, first of all, I think you have to find the right investor. We're really lucky. Our particular investors, they really get the defense market and they get defense tech, and so they've been exceptionally great with us. The other, kind of like I was saying earlier, I think this is where it helps to kind of have an understanding of the kind of the government funding process. So this is where, yeah, some of that experience in this industry really helps is identifying, hey, what are these pockets of the defense industry that just like you would in the commercial world, find a big addressable market that you think we think we can build a technology that has a big addressable market. And the really good news is once you win that market, we call it a program of record. Programs of record generally are very stable funding for a long, long time. So that's a huge advantage of it. Yeah, does. It does take a little longer to win a big a program of record, but in order, so it is really much the same process as you can look in. It's called it's available to us, the public, as a citizens. The United States, the Congress always publishes their budget every year. It's in we call it the J books, and you can go kind of like line by line through the public record and look at the J books and look which technologies are funding. So I think like some certain keys to look for are R&D technologies that are slated as R&D money with the DoD. This is what a interesting part is like. R&D and the DoD means they very well will buy products with that money, and they'll put it in what's called a test and evaluation. And so those are pockets of money that absolutely are to be competed for. That venture capital and startups can compete for. The government's really good about the SBIR process, as you guys maybe have heard about. There's a law that it gets renewed roughly every 5 years. It's up for renewal this year actually, which mandates that like 2% roughly of each department's budget, which for the Department of Defense is a huge amount, goes towards small businesses. So programs like the small business programs, DARPA, some of the research organizations, like there's the Defense Innovation Unit. So I do think the government's done a really good job, and the DoD have done a really good job lately setting up these different kind of organizations so that you can start to get design wins. You start to get these customer wins, which gives investors confidence that hey, these guys are getting design wins, that they're onto something here. While we bridge what's called the Valley of Death, and the Undersecretary of Defense, Heidi Shyu, she's kind of given some great speeches about this. That she has a new fund, and the Pentagon's putting money towards bridging what's called the Valley of Death. And the Valley of Death in the defense market is when you go from like prototype to that high rate a production program of record, and that there can sometimes be as much as like a year or two gap that you have to bridge there. But so that's where these like the SBIR funds and the DIU funds and some of these research and development funds are great at bridging that gap. And that's where it also is like having these great investors that see the kind of the larger picture there as you get into high rate production.
Interesting. Yeah, that was something I wanted to ask about is that kind of came up in my research as well, that I believe it's 80% of new entrants exit the defense market before they see recurring revenue, before they win a SBIR contract and then fall into that valley of death where they run out of money before they actually get a real contract. And so evidently you guys are not in that. I mean, you're describing there's some changes structurally happening to kind of prevent that trend. I guess, is there any other maybe advice you'd have around that?
Yeah, this is where I do. Yeah, sure. Like, this is where I do think venture capital backed, companies that are competing in the defense space have a real advantage over this cyber. The cyber stat is a really interesting one. I've dived in a lot there too. So yeah, that's correct. So like here's a more astounding stat. Like 90, yeah, very large portion of the cyber money goes towards companies that are either they live off cybers, which means like that's kind of their only source of revenue. They're only getting cyber revenue, or they're going towards very small businesses. Maybe you're thinking like we used to call them garage shops. It's like a two or three people that have like a really a brilliant idea, but they don't have like maybe the further the money in addition to the cyber money that they win to really scale that and turn it into a reproducible a business. And so I think that's where like now what's the more interesting stat is the venture capital backed companies that have gotten cybers. That percentage is a lot higher of a success rate. So I think that is where this partnership between venture capital and a government and these cyber programs and the DIUs and DARPAs and of the world are starting. You're starting to see these become a lot more successful with especially with Epirus, companies like Epirus.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay. Yeah, and then maybe also circling back to the commercial customer thing too. That was another aspect of this I was curious about is there a tension when you're developing both for the the defense application, right, but then also your commercial products. I mean, how do you divide and conquer that, or what's your approach there?
Yeah, it's a great question. What's some differences and what are some similarities between the commercial world and the government world? Um, yeah, so one of the keys there is I think for the first time, companies like Epirus, uh, defense, companies that are building products in defense tech, and we're pretty unique, I would say, in that we're building products for the commercial world as well, unique in recent history at least. We have that the one commonality there is this idea that hey, we're going to build our product on our own private funds ahead of instead of waiting for a government contract with like specific specs. We're going to go ahead. We see that product vision. We're going to go ahead and build it on our own funds and sell it like a commercial business model. And in fact, some of our defense products have gotten that commercial item designation. There's a special designation. So even though it was purposefully built for the government, it still got a commercial item designation specifically because we did build it in our own funds. And so that part is, but once you do that and make that leap, then the business model becomes very similar in many ways. Take for example, I think what's been really important about what we're doing versus what some of the kind of what was happening before in the defense industry was this idea of cost plus contracts have been a big issue in the past. What a cost plus contract means, that was a traditional way the government would give a big contract to a defense prime or defense company. And what that means is they said, hey, you tell us what your costs are, and then we'll pay you a 10%, or fixed fee on top of those costs. And so if you think about it, that actually incentivizes, it's the wrong incentive, right? If you're on a cost plus contract, it incentivizes you to spend as much money as possible, like spend every cent of the costs you said you were going to spend instead of trying to save money, figure out how to do it faster, figure out how to do it cheaper. And so then it's really the wrong incentive. And so the way to get around that is you've got to invest your own money. And so because some of these big defense primes have been on these cost plus contracts for so long with these like thin margins, they can't spend the money to build products on this. And once you become a cost plus fixed contract, you're no longer what's considered this really special category of company called a non-traditional defense contractor, which is what we are, which means it just means we're operating on a commercial business model. We pay for everything ourselves. So that's what's been really important, really key point about this defense tech revolution that's been started is that we are acting like a commercial company. We're not doing these cost plus contracts to get in that category. So now we have the same speed and motivation that a commercial company would. And so that part of it is very key. And then the other part of it, yeah, there's like security, like some of our contracts have tighter security restrictions. And so the great news is there's a lot of great tools out there, like the tools in the IT community have really cut off there. Whether you have Amazon, things like Amazon, GovCloud, you've got the Microsoft, all of the big IT companies are coming out with these types of products that are specifically meant to do so I can do IT and cloud and all these great things and keep my IT separated for government services. So I think we're at like a nice point in history where all those IT tools have finally caught up to support this kind of a dual business model.
Interesting. One thing I guess that sort of curious about within there is you're indicating being able to develop for private customers. Is this that sort of brings me to a question I was also curious about, is like maybe a difference from a typical private company that I was imagining for Epirus is like you're developing right, like a fairly advanced capability, right, that certainly I would imagine the US government would prefer to be the only one holding. Right. I mean, can I go out and buy a Leonidas? Sort of how does that work in terms of your freedom to sell to a commercial customer?
Oh, sure. Yeah. And so in our specific case, the bulk of our kind of commercial business came out of um, our smart power technology platform that I kind of talked about earlier. So first, let me talk about that. What is smart power? So smart power is like, imagine, so I live here in the Los Angeles area. I have a little garden out back. My wife always makes me go water the garden when we're allowed to. By the way, in a bit of a drought now, but when we're allowed to water the garden, we go, like, I'll turn on my hose and right at wastewater as I'm walking back, like water's flowing. What if I had an AI engine that would hard cut off the water, no leaks, not even a drop until right before I got to a plant. It would spit out just the right amount of water for that plant, then turn hard off again until I get to the next one. And then even if it's like a bigger plant or tree, it detects that and spits out just the right amount of water for plant number two. And so I'm very efficient in my water use. That's what we're doing for power. And that's what we had to do to basically what we're doing is one of the greatest one of my favorite stories is we do a lot of field testing. So very similar to like how you would launch a commercial a product and do like a product a demo for your customers for like a software as a service product. We do the exact same thing. It's just out in a desert somewhere, maybe that for our Leonidas, our drones, our counter drone swarm product at least. And so yeah, so when one of the first times we took our product out to the desert to demonstrate it for all of our government customers, we hooked it up to just a standard Home Depot generator, that we bought from the local department store there. And the reason is because the smart power chips that we developed were caught like enabled our system to be so power efficient, using that like hose analogy. Instead of like leaking water, spraying water the whole time, I'm using just the amount of drops I need to complete that task that I programmed it to do. And so now it's that smart power technology is really where we're getting a ton of traction. So let me tell you the commercial use case, for example. There's a lot of commercial communication use cases. So one of the commercial products that we built is there's a product engagement we did where first responders have this issue where like let's say a cell phone, if you're in a disaster area, maybe the cell phone tower is probably not working. And so maybe your communication infrastructure you normally have is down. And I can't go to the next cell phone tower. I got to go to a cell phone tower 5 miles over. And so what we did is using our smart power technology, we developed a chip that could boost your uh, power by 4 to 5x and reach that next cell phone tower. And then once I get signal back, oh, I've got that close a cell phone a signal back. It lowers back down the power to go back into a normal battery mode. So it's really this smart power technology that we've been able to. That was kind of the underlying force behind why we were able to bring this direct energy system to market. That's been kind of a success in the commercial world there.
Interesting, yeah, and so I guess that's kind of two different sales cycles. Right. I assume two different sales teams. Is it the same engineering team? Are there divisions about who has, you need government clearance to be working on the weapon for example, versus, the commercial product not, or
Yeah, I mean, the kind of the way, there are like certainly the productization stage. There's two different teams that work on that. Yeah, and I think that's kind of a key difference. Probably is just the a little bit of that like information security. And like I said, that's not hard with these modern tools these days. But certainly at the productization stage, you end up having two different teams for a lot of stuff. The other thing I'll mention though is like the big advantage of venture capital backed model that we have here is right like when a private company develops a technology on their own dime, even if it is at our private expense, even though it is absolutely for the United States government and Department of Defense, then it is easier to manage internally, like in terms of those types of separations. So I would say this ability to have two separate teams, but being able to manage the technology and the security, I do think there's a huge advantage with being venture capital backed, as opposed to like the traditional model of like a big defense prime is kind of already locked in and has probably a harder time doing a dual use defense and commercial path. Yeah.
Yeah. Another thing. So I guess I was curious about the like another thing that might be a difference potentially between you guys and a typical tech company is like around product messaging. Right on your website, it says directed energy, systems, right, and sort of as opposed to like EMP weapons or ray guns or something that would be more right, sort of consumer facing. Is that, do you find product messaging is another area in which you might vary somewhat from a typical tech company?
Yeah, sure. So I think the key to marketing 101 is always try and market to your audience. And so yeah, there definitely is some different audiences that we'll market to for our different products. And so, but kind of the underlying theme that we use, is like a power what's possible. You'll find so we're our underlying smart power technology. We're powering this direct energy system. By the way, like one interesting thing there. Let me talk about that. We call it a direct energy a system because it actually has. We're finding a lot of uses for direct energy and creating strong electromagnetic fields other than the defense use cases, even with that one, right? So there is the counter drone use case, obviously, but even within the direct energy category, the direct energy a weapon category, there's counter drone. We've stopped boats. We have counter a vessel for those things where you may there's a lot of use cases you can imagine where you may want to safely stop a boat. What we found is really it works against any electronics, and so now the other thing that's been really interesting is this is now a matter of public record, right? Part of my background is a National Science Foundation fellow. So one of the kind of really interesting stories about Epirus is you guys probably remember March 2020, COVID, 19. How can we ever forget that whole period we all went through? So everyone's trying to help all any way we can, right? I remember like a lot of our mechanical engineers were 3D printing face shields for the local hospitals when the hospitals were out of face shields. But one of the other things we did is we said, hey, we're happy to help out and see if what our direct energy systems can it sanitize virus. And it turns out we've been we got a little project with the National Science Foundation to kind of help out there, and so we found out it's very good at sanitizing viruses and so sanitizing spaces. So that's one of the reasons direct energy system, it actually has a ton of uses, and it all goes back to, we think of it like more like an iPhone, where directed energy counter drone is just one of the apps I can put on the iPhone. And I think that's really the power behind having this software defined directed energy system, is that because it is a semiconductor based and because it is software definable, we can put in we can program in a bunch of different use cases, and so update the capability very rapidly in that way.
Yeah, interesting. I guess kind of maybe a final question in the sort of the bank of the similarities to civilian tech companies. It sounded like you're describing that sort of your vision based approach as opposed to a cost plus kind of pricing approach, and directing what programs you're doing is one of the ways that you maybe avoid some of these kind of the pitfalls of the conventional defense primes. I was curious, just maybe, if you have any other thoughts on how you both bring the best practices of, private, tech, iteration speed, right, seems to be a strength for you guys, or as well as how you, kind of plan to avoid becoming an ossified, kind of slow moving defense company in the long term.
Yeah, it's a great question. How do we what other best practices from a VC and a Silicon Valley community have we adopted? And I think one of them certainly is absolutely. You mentioned the iteration cycle. I think the agile process is absolutely critical to our ability to go fast. And so, like, um, you guys are, I'm sure this community is well aware of the agile. I think one of the keys to the agile process is getting the customer in the loop very early in that fast customer feedback. And so I think that's what we've done here is get the customer in the loop as early as humanly possible. And I think Epirus has done a really good job of that so far. Is as we have a product vision, but let's build the minimum viable prototype of this thing working. I remember one of our very first prototypes. We said, hey, we can show the gist of this thing with just a single transistor. Like it's only going to be, it's only going to work out to a few meters away instead of way beyond a visible range like the tactical product will. But yeah, we can do that. Let's build that, show it to some customers, see what they think. We'll take their feedback and keep going. And that's exactly what we did. So we absolutely brought that practice. And I think that's another huge benefit of starting out fresh, starting a venture capital backed, is because a lot of like these cost plus contracts, you're required to do waterfall. And they say they're doing agile, but it's really like we'll call it a scrum to fall. It's like they're trying to do agile scrum, but within a waterfall framework. And so, yeah, just schedule, taking agile scrum, doing that ritual every sprint and seeing what feature we can do better. So we absolutely adopted that, and that's been really critical. And I think the big difference with us is we're one of the first companies, I think, especially in the defense space, to bring it to the hardware side as well. So I think the bigger question is like not necessarily how commercial is different from government, because I think with venture capital backed company, you can absolutely do agile practices great in both scenarios. The big difference is how do you do it? How's hardware different from software? Because software I can change my code. I just gotta hit the delete button or the comment button. Whereas with hardware, you have to deal with supply chain, have to deal with cycles. And so, but I think that this is where this revolution in a digital twin technology, which is what we specialize in, is like now used to, I think, 10 years ago, 20, 30 years ago, I had to physically build the analog thing and bring it into my lab and test it before I could do the iteration cycle. And so what we're doing is we're bringing that a digital twin methodology. So now even hardware design really is done in software up until the very, very last step. So that's been really key for us. So I think those two things are things that we've really treasured and adopted from the VC and a Silicon Valley community, is how to do agile really well for hardware, and then how to bring the customer in really early to the process. I think have been really beneficial to us for sure.
Nice. Yeah, maybe I can ask one more and then open up to the audience. Maybe we can keep this relatively quick. But just on that hardware point, do you see kind of a larger, shift, or have thoughts on the shift toward more VC becoming more friendly toward R&D intensive projects, like hardware stuff and so forth?
Yeah, I do. I absolutely do, because I think what we found is, I think the old theory was software is more capital efficient maybe than hardware, and I think that was true. And there's a bunch of like low hanging fruit. I think now with, like I said, with a digital twin technology, really reducing the risk of hardware design. It's not really black magic anymore. We can really reduce 90% of the risk in software for even hardware design. I think it's really opening up a ton of applications. So I think this next generation of really successful companies are going to be software that applies to hardware, like hardware software co-design products, which is what Epirus builds. I think that's going to be huge in this next 10 years.
Awesome. Great. Well, maybe now we can open up to audience questions if anyone has any burning questions.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Brady.
Cool. Thanks for joining us, Bo. Quick question. So I've made my own FPV drone. So I'm like curious, like what is the failure mode for this thing? And do you see there sort of being like this like technology race of ways of trying to like prevent this kind of vulnerability? Or is it just like an unstoppable type of thing with the EMP waves? Sorry, I'm not an expert in this stuff.
Yeah, no, totally. It's a great question. As the maker of high power microwave products, I like to think they're completely unstoppable. And yeah, so I'm going to use that answer. But I will answer. I will say you're absolutely right. It is going to be a dogfight, like a tit for tat race. As drone technology is going to keep getting better, counter drone technology, and there's going to be. We've seen that throughout history with different systems, and I think with fighter jets, and I honestly think drones are kind of the new where fighter jets were 50 years ago in terms of how advanced they are and how fast they're getting better. And so that's why we believe a software-defined approach, like a software-defined directed energy system, is so important because, yeah, maybe a change does get made. And so then we can go back and make a change very, very quickly in a week's time or even a couple of days' time with a software upgrade. Yeah, I can't talk too much about the failure mechanisms here, but just high level, it's that we're generating very, very strong electromagnetic fields that really electronics don't do well against voltages they weren't meant for, as I'll say that.
Hey, Bo, I got a question for you. Thanks for the talk today. It was very insightful. As a business that's trying to do business with the government, do you have any tips for, navigating, within that maze? You mentioned SBIRs, but, just curious to hear if you have any tips on, increasing the odds of success of being able to win those contracts or just doing business with the government in general.
Yeah, I think early engagement is really key with so I think the biggest mistake like early companies in the startup space might make with the government is like that I've seen happen a lot is like a BAA will come out, like say, whether it's a CIBR or, DIU or DARPA or some other government entity, they'll come out with like a paper that says, oh yeah, I'm looking for spec X, Y, and Z, and then the startup was like, oh, I have spec X, Y, and Z. I'll send in a proposal and to show a bunch of paperwork how I can do spec X, Y, Z, and maybe I'll get funded. And I think tying in the customers, even though there's a piece of paper out there that says that's what they want, the customer involvement is so, so important. Because usually many times what has happened is the customer dialogue and the customer involvement has happened that caused that paper to get written in that way. And so I think that'll really greatly increase your probability of success is this idea that you can actually go in to the customers and help shape requirements with them and work with them to help get those requirements shaped, get that BAA shaped, or even if not, even if you're not helping shape the requirements, at least build the relationship and really work person to person on like what do they want. So I think in that way, it is really a lot more similar to the commercial world than what some people give the government credit for. And I think the government is doing a much a much better job, especially recently in these types of kind of engagement. So yeah, back to the agile principles. Yeah, like work definitely person to person with the customer as early as you can.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Does anyone else have a question they'd like to ask? I'd actually be interested to ask a clarification on that. So I mean, like you can't, I guess, not having worked with government or defense customers, right? Like the way that I might try out a new product is simply ambush, right? My customer somewhere and show them a paper prototype or some kind of a simulation, right? And I guess what's the equivalent with a government customer for that?
Yeah, so I would look out for industry days. And so basically, so a lot of these government organizations will put out an industry day, or when organizations do put out a solicitation for, hey, we're interested in this type of technology, very often they're at that point they're saying, hey, we'd love to take your phone call about this technology. Like we're going to fund this. We're really interested in it. Like, yeah, call me. Let's and I think you'll find, yeah, these government folks are very willing to take your call and meet up, especially at the industry days. And then I can't impress this enough upon new companies. Like that I do the U.S. government is one of the most meritocratic organizations I think on the planet. So make your first contract work. Like they will very often reach out, like, all right, we're gonna give you a shot. You make sure it works, because that's how you're obviously, because if you can build that trust, then you can build your network, right? Like, hey, I've got a customer that I've built something for that works, that they trust, and then I think working that network and things like that become a lot easier. But yeah, it starts with trust, with building a product that works the way you said it would.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. If anyone, yeah, so maybe my last question then would be, I guess, is there any other sort of advice that you'd have from your journey, for kind of like the Silicon Valley techie type who might be interested in developing, for government customer defense? Anything we didn't ask?
Yeah, I would just say one of the reasons I feel passionately about working in the defense tech market is, yeah, I just really believe in. I think it's one of the best things we can do to further innovation. Like I said at the beginning, I think that's really how Silicon Valley started out. And I personally got into it because I worried a little bit that American or allies were losing our innovative edge. And so absolutely, that part of the mission is really big. Part of the passion for us to get in this is help keep a democracy and freedom going well, and that part of the mission I think is that part's really valuable to me.
Wonderful. Yeah, this has been really interesting. I appreciate your time, Bo. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks so much for hosting me. I love being here.
Awesome. Cool. Great. Have a great afternoon, everyone, and see you next time.